Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a place that's equal parts luxurious and slightly alarming. You blink slowly, soft velvet brushing against your cheek, the faint scent of jasmine hanging in the air like a memory. You're not in your usual bed. There's no alarm clock, no electric hum. Instead, you're tangled in thick silk sheets embroidered with gold lions. A gentle harp plays somewhere nearby. You glance to your left. There's a crown on the bedside table. To your right, a large, disturbing painting of a naked cherub riding a goose. Yes, you're in a royal bedchamber, but not the kind where you sip wine and read poetry. No, this place smells faintly of perfume, candle wax, and secrets. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and whether you're listening from Vienna or Vermont, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where these sleepy stories drift. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up in bed, taking in your surroundings. The ceilings stretch high, arched and painted with faded frescoes of saints who look like they've seen things they'd rather not talk about. Velvet curtains drape over enormous windows. The one is awkwardly pulled back with a belt. On the floor, a slipper, just one. Beside it, a goblet tipped over, staining the rug with what smells like honeyed wine. A serving girl tiptoes in, places fresh figs and almonds on a plate, and leaves without saying a word. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't need to. She's seen the royal guest rotation before. You swing your feet to the ground, the stone floor cold beneath your soles, and wrap a fur cloak around your shoulders. It smells like lavender, and also like regret. From the hall outside comes the soft thrum of music, flutes, the occasional tambourine, and what might be a giggle or a sob. You rise, pull open the grand oaken door, and step into the corridor. Tapestries line the walls, some showing saints, others showing what saints would not approve of. One shows a feast with a woman reclining suggestively on a roasted boar. Another features a king you do not recognize naked, except for a crown and a slightly smug smile. You walk quietly, not wanting to wake whoever or whatever was in the room next door. A soft snore comes from behind one door, laughter from another, a crash of something ceramic from a third. Downstairs, the palace is waking up, or perhaps it never really sleeps. In the great hall, a table is already set with roasted meats, golden pears, and pitchers of wine. A jester is juggling grapes for a group of noblemen who look like they haven't slept in 3 nights. One is still wearing yesterday's costume, a friar's robe, open at the chest. You sit quietly, observing. This is not the stuff of clean history textbooks. This is medieval monarchy, unfiltered. Behind the regal portraits and official decrees, many kings lived lives that were complicated, passionate, often indulgent, and sometimes, frankly, deeply bizarre. Tonight, you'll drift through their courts, their corridors, their scandalous whispers. And don't worry, we're keeping things PG-13. Mostly. But even the softest history carries a bit of spice. Historians still argue whether some of these tales are fact, fiction, or carefully crafted rumors, exaggerated by rivals, clergy, or board scribes. But between the lines of official chronicle and court gossip, one truth remains. Medieval kings were human, flawed, curious, eccentric, and sometimes really into weird things. So you sip your wine carefully, chew a fig that tastes vaguely like incense, and prepare yourself. You've got 14 more kings to meet, and their bedrooms are complicated. Section 2. You leave the great hall behind, still clutching a half-eaten pear, and make your way through a corridor that smells faintly of sandalwood, candle smoke, and some kind of flower you can't quite place. At the far end, a doorway carved with swirling lions opens into a chamber filled with warm light, thick rugs, and an altar adorned with both crucifixes and fresh rose petals. Welcome to the strange world of Alfonso IX of Leon and Galicia, pious pilgrim, kingly cousin, and charter member of the Why Did You Marry Your Relative Again Club. Alfonso IX rules in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, when Spain is still a patchwork of kingdoms, tangled in holy wars, treaties, and a generous dose of family drama. You step into his court and immediately notice the contradictions. Monks chanting on one side of the hall, troubadours strumming suggestive songs on the other. In between, Alfonso himself, rosary in one hand, love letter in the other. He's got a square jaw, deeply furrowed brows, and an expression that says, "I take penance very seriously, unless it interferes with my social calendar." You try to stay respectful. He is, after all, considered a reformer by some founding universities, backing religious orders, even supporting women's legal rights. But historians still argue whether that righteousness balanced out the fact that Alfonso had, let's call them unorthodox family values. He married twice. The first time to his cousin, Teresa of Portugal. It's not exactly a forbidden romance. Inter-cousin marriages were fairly common among European nobility trying to keep power in the family. But the church still frowned upon it, especially when neither party bothered to ask permission. The marriage was eventually annulled, officially because they were too closely related. Unofficially, maybe because Alfonso and Teresa didn't exactly see eye to eye on the whole. Who runs this court issue? Teresa later became a nun, and Alfonso, well, he kept marrying. His second wife, Berengaria of Castile, also his cousin. At this point, you start to wonder if the man simply had a limited social circle, or if someone was handing out marriage licenses like raffle tickets at a family reunion. The church, once again, said absolutely not, and annulled that marriage too, but not before they had 5 children. You sit in Alfonso's solar, a sunlit room overlooking a dusty courtyard. and sip something sweetened with cinnamon and honey. Outside, a procession of barefoot pilgrims files past. Inside, Alfonso pores over a parchment, half map, half love poem. He looks up, mutters something about the sacredness of affection, and returns to work. He was deeply religious, truly. He went on pilgrimages to Santiago, prayed daily, and even tried to reconcile church law with civil law. But he also had an eye for music, poetry, and reportedly noblewomen with strong jawlines. One scribe in the corner whispers that Alfonso had multiple mistresses, many of them housed in monasteries or convents. Another claims he once disguised himself as a friar to visit one of them unnoticed. You raise an eyebrow, the scribe shrugs. Kings get bored, he says. You step into the royal library, where court records are kept. A young clerk points to a chronicle noting that Alfonso's personal life caused so much tension with the church that Rome threatened to excommunicate him again. Yet, despite the chaos, the king was popular. His subjects admired his honesty, his leadership, his commitment to justice. He founded the University of Salamanca, one of the oldest in Europe. He codified laws. He wrote letters filled with flowery prose that somehow blended theology and flirting. You flip through one, written to a court lady. Your soul is a garden, your voice the bells of Easter, your hair like the script of Holy Writ, though I confess, I would rather read it in the moonlight. You're not sure whether to blush or giggle. Alfonso's reign ends not with scandal, but with quiet illness. He dies in 1230, his reputation tangled in contradictions. Pious and passionate, scholarly and scandalous, reformer and romantic, you rise from your seat in his court and stretch. One slippered foot bumps a rolled scroll under the table. It's a marriage proposal to another cousin. Of course, you quietly leave the chamber, tiptoeing past a tapestry depicting St. James, who appears to be covering his eyes. One king down, 13 to go. And they're only going to get weirder. Section 3. You step out of Alfonso's court with your head spinning, partly from the honeyed wine, partly from the family tree that now resembles a tightly knotted ball of string. You blink into the candlelit corridor and wander further down the hallway, your soft slippers padding quietly over worn tiles. Eventually, you reach another palace, colder, stiffer, and distinctly more French. This is the court of Philip IV of France, also called Philip the Fair. Not fair as in kind. Fair as in he had excellent cheekbones and a stare that could curdle milk. You glance up at a statue of him in the corridor, carved in stone. He looks noble, elegant, and just the tiniest bit smug. You step into his chamber. Gilded columns, velvet curtains, and a bookshelf with exactly 3 books, all locked shut with iron clasps. A small, glittering crucifix rests beside a goblet of wine, and a silver bowl filled with rose petals. The air smells like incense and ambition. Philip sits at a long table scribbling on parchment, surrounded by advisors who look like they haven't blinked in hours. He's calculating, always calculating, how to strengthen the crown, undermine his enemies, and avoid any involvement with anything remotely resembling fun. But despite the cold, statuesque exterior, Philip's court was notorious for its whispered scandals, particularly when it came to a strange event involving a tower, a locked room, and an unexpected number of monks. The story, as it drifts to you from a loquacious court servant who probably shouldn't be talking to you, goes like this. Philip had grown increasingly paranoid about corruption and disloyalty. He'd already clashed with the papacy, arrested the Knights Templar, and taxed the clergy. But then his eye turned to his own palace. One night, so the rumors say, Philip donned a hooded cloak, slipped out of his bedchamber, and made his way to a nearby monastery hidden behind the palace walls. With a torch and a few trusted guards, he stormed into a room where, allegedly, a secret party was taking place. The room was dimly lit, heavy with the scent of frankincense and figs. Inside, a group of monks, courtiers, and possibly some visiting noblewomen masked, draped in silks, lounging on cushions, and partaking in something that historians politely call medieval recreation. You sip a cup of watered wine and lean closer. So, what kind of party are we talking about? The servant grins. The kind where even the tapestries looked shocked. Historians still argue whether this event actually happened, or if it was the invention of Philip's enemies, particularly after his harsh treatment of the Knights Templar, who were burned at the stake under his orders. Some say he used these rumors to justify a moral crackdown. Others say he simply walked in on one too many velvet-clad secrets and decided to burn the whole room down. Metaphorically, if not literally, you tiptoe through the palace and pass a corridor where the wall is unusually bare. That used to be a mural, someone whispers, but it featured a monk and a fruit bowl in a compromising position. It was quietly scraped away, despite his supposed moral rigidity. Philip's court saw its share of indulgences, lavish feasts, finely dressed companions, and an unusual interest in ensuring privacy for his personal council chambers, which happened to be located directly beneath the Queen's bedroom. Coincidence? Probably not. And let's not forget the infamous Tour de Nesle affair, which erupted just after Philip's death, but whose seeds were likely planted during his rule. 3 of his daughters-in-law were accused of adultery, possibly aided by 2 brothers who worked in the Tour de Nesle. The scandal rocked France, cast shadows on the Capetian line, and led to a string of unfortunate imprisonments and some very stern tapestries. Philip himself died young at only 46. A stroke, or perhaps a fall during a hunt. Some say it was divine punishment for his treatment of the Templars. Others claim he simply collapsed under the weight of his own seriousness. You wander back into the hall, brushing past a tapestry that looks oddly familiar, until you realize it's St. Augustine covering his ears. The palace is colder now, emptier. You wrap your cloak tighter and slip past a door left slightly ajar. Inside, a lone court musician softly plays a lute, eyes closed, lost in a melancholy tune. Even scandal needs a soundtrack, it seems. You exhale, 2 kings down, both cousins of chaos, each in their own way. And something tells you this next one. He's going to need even more candles. Section 4. You step out into the northern chill, your breath fogging in the night air. Gone are the rose petals and warm, wine-drenched halls of France. Ahead lies a colder castle, carved into the rock like a secret kept far too long. The wind bites, the windows rattle, and even the moon seems reluctant to hang around too long. You've arrived at the court of Eric of Pomerania, King of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, though his reign was less about unity and more about unintentional comedy. And bathrooms. So many bathrooms. You enter through a frost-covered door that creaks like a cranky ghost. Inside, tapestries line the walls, but not of hunting scenes or saints. No, these ones depict maritime battles, vast bathhouses, and one very suspicious image of a king holding a loofah like a scepter. You squint. Is that Eric? Yes, it is. Eric was raised by Queen Margaret I, a woman more iron than silk. She molded him into a king, kind of. He inherited the Kalmar Union, a tricky political merger of the Scandinavian kingdoms. But while she gave him crowns, what Eric really seemed to crave was hot water and alone time. You wander deeper into the palace and soon realize the layout is bizarre. Rooms are arranged in spirals. Hidden passages link bath chambers to feasting halls. And there are so many tubs. Marble tubs, wooden tubs, copper basins lined with herbs. One even has little carved sea monsters on the handles. A steward passes, sees your confused expression, and whispers, he liked to think in the bath, and also hold court there. You raise an eyebrow. As in, make decisions. The steward nods, and sometimes splash people. Eric was known for his eccentric habits. He'd often disappear for hours, if not days, into his private steam chambers, emerging only to announce a new tax or a surprising alliance. Rumors say he kept a team of servants whose sole job was to refill perfumed bathwater and place rose petals in precise spirals. Historians still argue whether this obsession was rooted in ritual, health, or sheer indulgence. Some claim Eric believed steaming himself purified his royal aura. Others think he simply didn't want to talk to people unless everyone was damp and slightly pink. You're ushered into one such chamber, now muggy, candlelit, lined with stone benches. In the center, a pool steams gently. Floating in it, Eric, or rather, a wax figure of him, reclining regally with a golden circlet and a look of divine detachment. A placard nearby reads, "Replica of His Majesty's morning reflection." You're not sure whether that means philosophy or just looking at his reflection in the water. Beyond the bathhouse is the mirror room, another oddity. Every wall, every ceiling panel, every piece of furniture is polished to a shine. A noblewoman nearby whispers, he liked to watch himself think. You wander through the halls, passing odd vignettes. A long table set for no one, a reading nook filled with books on naval law and foot hygiene. A closet of custom slippers, each pair lined with mink fur and bearing tiny embroidered ships. And then, the strangest detail of all, a scroll labeled washing schedule, signed in his own hand, with entries like mid-morning rosewater rinse, post-lunch cinnamon splash, sunset pine steam if cloudy. You don't know whether to laugh or take notes. Despite his oddities, Eric was no fool. He enacted reforms, defended trade routes, and clashed repeatedly with the Hanseatic League. But his reign eventually soured. His heavy taxation, aloof nature, and obsession with ceremonial order made enemies. The Union crumbled. He was deposed not once, but 3 times, and ended his days as a pirate king on the island of Gotland. Yes, really. He took to the sea, wore a hood, and commanded ships that raided trade routes. Some say he even brought a portable bath on board. Others say he simply found a new way to avoid courtly chatter. You exit the castle, the wind slapping your cheeks, and glance back at the tall tower where smoke still curls from the bathhouse chimney. 3 kings down. One left his cousin at the altar. One outlawed monks who partied. And this one, he soaked his way through a union and into piracy. And you're only starting to feel the steam. Section 5. You leave the chilly mists of Eric's bath-obsessed castle behind. Your skin still vaguely prunny from all that second-hand humidity. As the Nordic frost fades from your cloak, the air grows warmer, sweeter. Even the scent of orange blossoms, oud, and something spiced drifts in like a sigh. You're no longer in the land of icy fjords. You're now stepping into a lush garden of silk canopies and sandalwood screens. Welcome to the court of John II of Castile, a king whose poetic soul somehow kept getting distracted by perfumed courtiers and luxurious hideaways. You pass through archways carved with delicate Moorish patterns. The stonework is smooth and glowing in the sunlight. The sound of a fountain trickling in the courtyard is joined by soft lute music, and somewhere, a man reciting verses in Spanish, so romantic your ears tingle. This is a world of courtly love, but with a twist. John II, who ruled Castile in the early 15th century, had the heart of a poet and the spending habits of someone who thought gold grew on pomegranate trees. He loved verse, tournaments, falconry, and splendor. But what he adored most, flattery. And his court was filled with people who were more than happy to offer it. You follow the scent of rose oil through a beaded curtain into one of his many salons. Plush cushions litter the floor. Women in silken gowns lounge with fans shaped like leaves. A eunuch is fanning a golden brazier that spits sparks like tiny fireflies. John reclines nearby, sipping chilled almond milk and nodding at a nobleman reading a sonnet about John's eyebrows. You raise an eyebrow yourself. John was often manipulated by his favorite, Alvaro de Luna, a shrewd noble who basically ran Castile. While John floated from garden to garden, de Luna knew exactly how to please the king. With lavish poetry contests, lavish gifts, and lavish suggestions about which courtiers should be invited into John's private garden for evening reflections. The king had an entire wing of the palace turned into what some described as a poetic harem, a place filled with incense, harp music, and intellectual flirtation. The participants, courtly ladies, young pages, traveling poets, and the occasional monk with unusually good posture. You find yourself in one such room now. A woman is painting delicate calligraphy on a silk scroll, while a shirtless man balances a bowl of pomegranates on his head for no discernible reason. You sit down quietly on a velvet pouf and watch as another courtier recites a love letter addressed to the one with the honeyed voice who lives near the orange tree. The king claps. So does the orange tree, almost. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were innocent expressions of art or well-curated excuses for very decorative mischief. Contemporary accounts are vague, often written by court chroniclers who used phrases like, "The king withdrew with select companions to pursue musings under the stars." You pass a cabinet labeled Fragrance Archive. Inside are jars of jasmine balm, fig resin, and something called Desert Lightning. The labels have dates, names, and curiously ratings. John apparently kept track of who wore which scent and how long they lingered. But John wasn't just lounging in scented rooms. He had 2 marriages, one to Maria of Aragon, and after her death, to Isabella of Portugal. Both women were said to be intelligent and politically savvy. Both were reportedly frustrated with John's selective focus on courtly diversions. He also had children, including Isabella I of Castile. Yes, that Isabella, the one who would later finance Columbus and reshape Europe. It's unclear what she thought of her father's sandalwood-scented lifestyle, but one imagines she inherited her discipline from someone else. Eventually, John's favoritism toward Alvaro de Luna caused enough political backlash that de Luna was arrested and executed. John, reportedly heartbroken, grew melancholy. He spent more time in prayer and less time judging citrus-themed love poems. He died in 1454, possibly from digestive troubles. You exit through a courtyard where flowering vines twist up into the colonnades. A woman in yellow silk offers you a sugared almond and says nothing. A page bows, opens a fan with your name on it, and then disappears into a curtain of blue gauze. It's a dreamy place, so beautiful it's almost unreal. But as you glance one last time at a fresco of the king surrounded by flowers and flute players, you realize something. Sometimes power isn't lost through war or rebellion. Sometimes it just drifts away in a cloud of rosewater. Section 6. You leave behind the perfumed haze of Castile, blinking as reality resets around you. The jasmine, the poetry, the pomegranates, it's all been replaced by cold English stone, gray skies, and a breeze that smells faintly of damp wool and disappointment. You've just arrived in the court of Edward II of England, a king whose reign is equal parts tragedy, favoritism, and feather pillows that stirred up more political drama than a season of royal reality TV. You walk through the corridor of Westminster Palace, the walls lined with grim portraits, every face frowning slightly, as if they already know how this story turns out. The torchlight flickers across tapestries depicting stags, swords, and ships. One of them is partially scorched. No one explains why. In the great hall, nobles mumble disapproval behind goblets of ale. A servant scuttles by carrying a swan feather cushion. Another follows, holding a velvet stool. You step aside. You're learning, in Edward's court, comfort equals authority. Edward II wasn't your typical warlike monarch. He liked manual labor. Really, he dug ditches with peasants. He built hedges with his own hands. This would be charming if the English nobility hadn't found it horrifying. He actually sweats, one courtier whispers to you, like a commoner. But the real controversy, his love life. Enter Piers Gaveston. Edward and Gaveston were inseparable. Childhood friends, companions, confidants, and many believed something more. Edward showered him with titles, gifts, and lands, too many for the noble's liking. He even called him brother and sweetest thing, and once gifted him an entire county. And not a small one, either. At court, Gaveston wore lavish clothes, mocked the barons with rude nicknames, and hosted flamboyant tournaments. He was once spotted wearing purple silk lined with ermine at a time when that was reserved for royalty. You overhear a bishop mutter, "And the boots. My word, the boots." Historians still debate the nature of Edward and Gaveston's relationship. Some insist it was romantic. Others call it political favoritism taken too far. But one thing is certain, it did not go over well. The barons demanded Gaveston be exiled. Edward sent him away, then promptly called him back, again and again. This didn't go unnoticed. Eventually, things came to a head. Gaveston was captured, put on trial, and without the king's approval executed. Edward was devastated for days. He reportedly refused food, spoke to no one, and wore only black. He even had Gaveston's body preserved and paraded through the countryside so he could bury it properly. You pass a chapel in the palace, now dimly lit, its walls carved with angels whose expressions are unusually sympathetic. A single candle flickers near a small plaque, "PG Beloved." Time passed, but the pattern remained. Next came Hugh Despenser the Younger, another favorite, another scandal. This time, the favoritism was even more blatant. Hugh gained vast estates, power over court appointments, and influence that pushed Edward's already wavering political skills right over the edge. The barons revolted again. This time, the rebellion wasn't just about court gossip. It was about power, land, and betrayal. Even Edward's queen, Isabella of France, had enough. She left for Paris, started her own movement, and returned with an army. You've heard of awkward breakups, but few involve full-scale invasions. Edward was deposed, imprisoned, and, as legend has it, met his end in Berkeley Castle, under circumstances still whispered about in horrified tones. You sit quietly in a side room now, watching as a court musician tunes a lute. Behind him, a tapestry depicts Edward standing in a meadow, wearing a crown that's slightly too large and a tunic far too ornate for gardening. A servant offers you a plum. You shake your head. Edward's story is sad. There's a gentleness to him in the records. A man who liked music, art, and honest labor. But he lived in a time when softness in a king was seen as weakness. And his choice of companions, whomever they truly were, only fueled the fire. You leave the hall, the wind slapping your cloak as you step back into the gray courtyard. Raindrops begin to fall, gentle at first, then steadier. You pull your hood up and walk on. 5 kings down, and while some were merely eccentric, Edward's story reminds you that in history, indulgence isn't always about luxury. Sometimes it's simply about love in a world that never learned how to handle it. Section 7. The rain tapers off as you step out of Westminster's sorrowful stones. The path leads you east now, winding past quiet fields and echoing forests, until the ground feels uneven beneath your feet, rugged, rocky, and somehow sloshing. Welcome to Bohemia, where things are about to get stranger. You're standing outside the court of Wenceslaus IV, King of Bohemia and Holy Roman Emperor briefly, who ruled not so much with an iron fist as with a tankard in one hand and a set of questionable priorities in the other. You push open the massive wooden doors of his fortress and are immediately hit by the scent of stale beer, roasted boar, and is that chain oil. You step into the great hall, and it's like a banquet crashed into a blacksmith's workshop. And then both invited their weirdest cousins at the head of the table, slumped lazily on a throne that's been upholstered in bearskin and wine stains, is Wenceslaus himself. His crown is askew. His eyes are sharp but sleepy. His beard is halfway braided with what might be bread crumbs. You sit quietly on a bench as servants rush past with tankards and platters. A lute player strums aimlessly in the corner, and someone in the rafters is definitely feeding a raccoon. Wenceslaus loved drink, not in the occasional celebrate a treaty sort of way, more in the missed 5 council meetings because I was napping in the cellar sort of way. He frequently disappeared for days, choosing to visit taverns and breweries rather than deal with the dull business of ruling. You're guided down a stone corridor to his private chambers, though chambers is a generous term. It's more of a lounge with low lighting soft furs, and 3 or 4 rusty iron chains hanging from the ceiling for decoration. Allegedly, a courtier leans in to whisper. He liked to chain people up, not for torture, for reflection. You squint. Reflection. The courtier nods solemnly. He said it helped him think clearly. Historians still argue whether these chained visits were political intimidation tactics, spiritual retreats, or just one man's deeply strange version of guided therapy. Some prisoners were released, saying they'd had epiphanies. Others said they were fed dried cherries and asked to rate the king's poetry. You walk through the wine cellar next, massive, humid, and somehow warmer than expected. It's stacked with barrels labeled Council Meeting Number 7 Never Happened, Divine Grape of the South, and Emergency, only with a skull painted on it. Despite his indulgences, Wenceslaus wasn't stupid. He had a keen sense of symbolism, and he genuinely tried to maintain Bohemia's independence during the turbulent shifts in the Holy Roman Empire. But his erratic behavior, obsession with alcohol, and preference for talking to philosophers instead of generals led to one major problem. He kept getting kidnapped, seriously, by his own nobles, multiple times. One kidnapping happened mid-nap, another after a council member called him spiritually fermented. Each time, Wenceslaus would vanish for a few days, then return with a new robe and a long-winded explanation about how chains are merely physical manifestations of internal restraint. You overhear a servant muttering, "We started locking the pantry. That helped." A second servant adds, "Only until he dug a tunnel through the cellar wall." You pass a room filled with caged songbirds and brass lanterns, each inscribed with a different saying: truth in drink, time waits for no monk, and ask not what the throne can do, ask if the throne reclines. Toward the back of the castle, you come upon Wenceslaus's reflection chair, a wooden throne fitted with bells, mirrors, and a pipe that leads directly to the ale tap. It's angled slightly off-center, so he could sit and observe truth at a slant. You sit in it for a moment and feel your IQ drop by 3 points. Still, something about this place lingers in your mind. For all his excesses, Wenceslaus was oddly beloved by certain citizens. He wasn't cruel. He rarely executed dissenters. And he had a fondness for animals, poets, and weirdly sincere philosophical debates about the moon. He died quietly, perhaps fittingly, from a stroke after a long day of wine and solitude. His reign was chaotic, undisciplined, but not without flashes of thoughtfulness and strange beauty. You leave through the back courtyard, where the king's old hounds nap in the sun, and someone's carved to dream is to rule into a stone bench near the stable. 6 kings down. Some ruled with the sword, some ruled with scandal, and some ruled with a wine goblet in one hand and a leather-bound book of rants in the other. You step back onto the path, a little buzzed from the cellar air, and brace yourself. Because the next court, it's about to light itself on fire. The wind carries the scent of burning pine and distant drums as you move away from Wenceslaus's wine-splattered court. The road bends toward France once more, but this time it doesn't lead to velvet and candlelight. No, this time it leads to feathers, flames, and one of the strangest royal parties in European history. You step through gilded gates into a courtyard pulsing with music. Lutes, flutes, tambourines, and laughter wild, high-pitched, and just slightly unhinged. You've arrived in the late 14th century court of Charles VI of France, also known, rather ominously, as Charles the Mad. Tonight's festivities are already underway. The king's masked ball, known to posterity as the Bal des Ardents, or Ball of the Burning Men, is a swirling mess of silk, fur, and very bad decisions. You step into the ballroom and immediately squint. Every candle seems too close to something flammable. The air is hot with perfume and anticipation. Courtiers twirl in elaborately embroidered costumes. Harps pluck softly in the background. And in the center of it all, a small group of men dance and caper in matching outfits made of flax and pitch, yes, pitch, designed to look like wild men of the forest. You ask a courtier beside you, "What's with the fur suits?" He grins. It's a satire. The king and his companions are mocking superstition. Forest spirits, that sort of thing. You nod slowly. With fire nearby, he pauses, frowns, and says, "I see your point." The wild men leap and howl dramatically. The audience claps. The mood is giddy until someone enters with a torch. A real torch. The exact details are debated. Historians still argue whether it was the Duke of Orleans who brought the flame too close, or someone else entirely. But what's not debated is what happened next. One of the dancers catches fire, and then another. And suddenly, the ballroom erupts into chaos. Flames leap, screams ring out, guests stampede, and the smell of burning flax fills the air. Servants rush with wine to douse the flames. One dancer jumps into a vat of water. 4 men die. 2 survive. One of the survivors, King Charles himself. You stand frozen as the scene plays out in front of you, music screeching to a halt, the laughter replaced by horror. Someone yells, "Get the queen out." Another courtier faints. And Charles, he stands in the middle of it all, blackened but unburned, staring into space. Silent, pale, already halfway detached. This isn't his first episode. Charles VI began showing signs of mental instability years earlier. He once attacked his own knights during a march, believing they were traitors. At times, he forgot who he was. He sometimes believed he was made of glass, and insisted no one touch him for fear of shattering. He had long periods of calm, but when the madness took him, it took him completely. The court, ever in denial, tried to carry on. Ministers ruled in his name. His wife, Queen Isabeau, navigated court politics while dodging rumors and rebellions. His brother fought for power. France trembled, but the parties continued. You're led to Charles's private chambers, a place far quieter than the ballroom. lined with star maps and embroidered pillows. A painting of St. Denis stares down from the wall with a look that says, "We've made some choices tonight." Charles sits nearby, wrapped in robes, speaking softly to a lapdog that may or may not be stuffed. His attendants tiptoe. The walls are padded with tapestries. There are no mirrors, and only one candle flickering in a bowl of water. You hear whispering behind you. They say he still sees the fire when he closes his eyes. The Bal des Ardents became legend, not just because of its horror, but because it captured the instability of the time, a France at war with England, a court dancing at the edge of a nervous breakdown, a king caught between lucidity and hallucination, wearing a crown that grew heavier with every flare of his mind. You walk the palace corridors as silence settles again. The torch bearers are gone. The costumes lie in a heap, soaked and blackened. A musician plucks a hesitant chord, but no one listens. Outside, the moon glows bright. A guard pulls his cloak tighter. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. 7 kings down. And now you've seen how a single spark, literal or otherwise, can turn a throne into tinder. You walk on, every shadow now shaped like a flickering flame. Section 9. You don't look back at the ballroom. The smell of smoke still clings to your cloak as you leave Paris behind, wandering east through dense forests and winding roads until the trees part and reveal something utterly surreal, a shimmering marble palace perched atop a hill, bathed in golden light. You blink, then blink again. This place looks like someone took all the most extravagant ideas from every royal court and said, "Yes, and make it sexier." Welcome to the summer residence of Sigismund of Luxembourg, Holy Roman Emperor, connoisseur of silk robes, and architect of something historians politely refer to as excessive court leisure. You step into a colonnaded hall draped in gauzy fabrics that waft gently in the breeze. The floor is polished so smooth you nearly slide into a vase shaped like a swan. A servant catches your elbow and whispers, "Careful. His Majesty does not believe in shoes on marble." You look down. Everyone is barefoot. Sigismund was many things a shrewd politician, a lover of books, a key figure at the Council of Constance. But what set him apart was the way he ran his court, like a spa that occasionally made treaties. He believed in the power of elegance, pleasure, and personal diplomacy. And nowhere was that more evident than in his love castle. Yes, that's what they called it. Originally intended as a summer palace, this sprawling estate was rumored to serve a dual purpose, a retreat for intellectual conversation, and a carefully curated paradise for emotional experimentation. You wander through archways etched with Latin phrases like amor vincit omnia and curiosity is a virtue. Passing rooms filled with mirrors, oil lamps, and daybeds that seem to multiply like vines. Servants glide silently by carrying trays of wine, baskets of figs, and occasionally, curiously, books titled things like The Gentle Art of Gesture. You find yourself in the heart of the complex, the bath pavilion. It's shaped like a clover, with a circular steam pool at its center, ringed by smaller basins filled with rosewater, mint, and something that smells like cinnamon bread. A man nearby is being serenaded by a lute player, while someone else oils his feet. A courtier notices your wide-eyed look and chuckles. He says diplomacy flows more easily when everyone is damp and fragrant. You're offered a robe. It's embroidered with tiny golden swans. You accept it without asking questions. Sigismund would often invite scholars, poets, and foreign envoys to stay for weeks, sometimes months. Within this pleasure-drenched micro-kingdom, discussions of statecraft happened over massages. Marriage treaties were drafted in hot pools. There's even a guest book somewhere, one page signed with a wine stain in the shape of a heart. Historians still argue whether the love castle was an innocent haven for discussion, or whether it was something far more curated. Rumors abounded of masked evenings, perfumed letters, and a secret vault of confessions, where guests shared stories they wouldn't dare put in writing. You walk into the library, which, true to form, has both philosophy scrolls and a suspicious number of illustrated poetry books. One bears the title, A Treatise on the Symbolism of Fruit in Intimate Contexts. You put it down quickly. Despite all this, Sigismund was no idle hedonist. He helped broker peace deals, fought wars, and played a pivotal role in reforming the Catholic Church during the Western Schism. His court may have been drenched in scented oil, but his hand was still on the wheel of history. You find a sunlit corner where a circle of courtiers debates the ethics of passion. One man quotes Ovid, another counters with Aquinas, a third just says, "But have you tried sharing a melon with someone while floating?" You smile, sit quietly, and sip chilled honey water from a crystal goblet. Outside, the sun sets in slow motion hues. Someone lights a lantern shaped like a swan. The air is soft, the ground is warm, and for a fleeting moment, it feels like the world really could be ruled with laughter and lavender. But you know better. Even here, under domed ceilings and silken drapes, politics still swirled, enemies plotted, and the love castle, it didn't last. Years later, it was abandoned. Some say it burned, others claim it simply faded from memory, like a dream you almost believed was real. You stand, stretch, and wrap your robe tighter. 8 kings down. One lit a party on fire. This one tried to light the soul, and now you step quietly back into the night, ready for the next crown to tilt. Section 10. You leave the marbled wonderland behind, the air still tingling faintly with lavender and long-forgotten oaths. The road winds northward again, cutting through a rugged highland mist where the scent of peat and pine clings to your cloak. Scotland, wild, weather-worn. And tonight, wrapped in silence so thick, it feels like the hills are listening. You arrive at a gray stone chapel flickering with candlelight. Not a cathedral, not not a fortress, something in between. You step through its iron-ringed doors and find yourself in the presence of James IV of Scotland, the pious penitent, the sword-swinging romantic, and perhaps the most aesthetically dramatic king in this entire journey. You enter the hall, where stained glass throws colored shadows across the flagstones. The space is half court, half theater. A monk recites psalms near a harpist. A falcon sits calmly on a perch, and in the center, beneath a canopy woven with stars and crosses, stands James himself, dressed in velvet, rosary in hand, eyes like storm clouds in prayer. You ease into a pew. A friar offers you a dried plum and a look of weary affection. James ruled from 1488 until 1513, and was, by many accounts, a contradiction wrapped in a crown. Fiercely intelligent, deeply devout, and occasionally surprisingly indulgent in symbolic penance. His court was filled with scholars and theologians, and also actors, alchemists, and jugglers in embroidered cowhide. You overhear one courtier whisper. He sponsors entire plays where monks do cartwheels to teach morality. Another adds, and once had himself publicly whipped by barefoot friars on Good Friday while fasting. You blink. James believed in atonement, but he also believed in spectacle. His penance was performance, layered with pageantry. He once walked barefoot through Edinburgh to confess for the death of his father, who had died fighting against him, publicly, in battle. And yet James wore a hair shirt underneath his robes for years afterward. Historians still debate whether this was political theater or sincere penitence. Likely both. He confessed often, attended Mass daily, and funded more monasteries than most kings of his time. But his piety never stopped him from pursuing earthly indulgences, especially when it came to women. James had mistresses. Several. Many were noblewomen, gifted lands and estates. One, Margaret Drummond, may have been poisoned, perhaps to clear the way for his political marriage to Margaret Tudor of England, sister of Henry VIII. You step through the chapel's side door into a private retreat, a garden enclosed by stone arches. It's moonlit now, quiet except for the trickle of a spring. Here, James wrote love poems. Yes, he was a writer too. His verses spoke of longing, beauty, devotion, and occasionally feet. A scroll lies open on a nearby bench. The poem reads, "Thy step, like whisper o'er the moss, doth make me sin, then ask forgiveness." Subtle, a friar nearby tells you that James once commissioned a troupe of performers to enact biblical morality tales with creative interpretations. One involved a talking goat. Another, a temptress portrayed by a well-known jester in drag. The audience included bishops. They applauded. You wander into his private library, a cozy, firelit room stacked with books on astronomy, scripture, and herbalism. An illuminated manuscript lies open on a lectern. The margins are filled with notes, some in Latin, others in Scots. One simply reads, "Too many sins to count. Try again tomorrow." Despite the spectacle, James wasn't merely a theatrical soul. He encouraged education, improved justice systems, and worked hard to bring peace between Scotland and England. He even embraced dentistry, one of the first European monarchs to fund surgical education. He did insist on testing medical techniques on prisoners, but still, he led a cultured, Renaissance-inspired court filled with artisans, philosophers, and of course, a few flexible friars. But penance has limits. In 1513, he invaded England, driven by alliance and pride. At Flodden Field, he met a brutal end, fighting bravely but falling to an English blade. His body was taken, buried hastily, lost to time. A king obsessed with morality plays died in one he couldn't script. You kneel briefly in the garden, the dew soaking your knees. Somewhere in the chapel, the choir begins to chant. James's story lingers like incense, beautiful, heavy, and slightly theatrical. A king who confessed more than he conquered, who wept, fasted, and flirted all with the same intensity. You rise slowly and exit into the mist. 9 kings down. Some ruled through indulgence, some through illusion. This one, through performance. You follow the sound of bells down the darkened path, unsure if you've left church or simply stepped onto another stage. Section 11. You follow the mist-slick stones down from the Scottish Highlands, and the bells fade behind you. The road dips low, where marshlands shimmer with moonlight, and reeds whisper secrets in a language only frogs truly understand. Then the world opens up again, flat, wide, and shimmering with wealth. Gold-topped churches, crimson banners, and towers so tall they feel like they're leaning into heaven. You've arrived in Krakow, capital of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at its height, and more specifically, into the scented, honey-drenched orbit of Sigismund, III Vasa, king, aesthete, and unapologetic patron of things that looked fancier than they functioned. The palace is oddly quiet tonight. You enter a long, low hall where every candle is filtered through stained glass lanterns. The carpets are deep enough to trip in. You catch your reflection in a polished bronze tray and realize your hair's somehow better here. Must be the humidity. A group of courtiers glide past in robes that sparkle like oil spills. One of them whispers, "He's in the chapel." You follow. Sigismund is kneeling before a massive, gold-gilded altar. His robes are embroidered with scenes from the life of Saint Stanislaus. His fingers are heavy with rings, and yet he doesn't fidget, doesn't move. You get the feeling he could kneel there for hours. Sigismund was king of both Poland and Sweden, though not always at the same time. His reign was a long balancing act between deeply personal faith, passionate aesthetic control, and, well, just a smidge of monarchical micromanaging. He was very Catholic. That's important. Poland at the time was a bubbling mix of Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish and Catholic communities, remarkably tolerant for the era. But Sigismund, he dreamed of a united Catholic kingdom. This, of course, made things tense. He poured vast amounts of money into building lavish churches, reforming religious orders, and bringing Baroque architecture into Poland in a way that made even Rome say, "Wow, okay." But his indulgence wasn't just theological, it was visual. He demanded that the royal court dress in colors that matched the season: pastel silks in spring, deep velvet in winter. He personally approved floral arrangements, and he once postponed a state banquet because the napkins weren't folded with sufficient reverence. You walk through the royal kitchens where a cook is being chastised for presenting a pheasant with its legs too far apart. The head steward turns to you and says, "His Majesty believes in proportion." Despite his perfectionism, Sigismund's court was not all holy silence and golden goblets. It was also home to scholars, painters, and at least 3 professional dwarfs, one of whom served as the official jester and royal chess opponent. He was rumored to always win, or at least pretend to. Historians still argue whether Sigismund's reign was marked more by personal vanity or genuine artistic revival. Some call him a pompous recluse who let others do the ruling. Others say he was a visionary who elevated Polish culture to its golden peak. You're escorted into the Hall of Mirrors and Saints, where every inch of wall is carved with tiny religious figures, each hand-painted in lifelike detail. In the corner, a mirror reflects your image next to a statue of Saint Cecilia, and for a moment, it looks like she's whispering in your ear. Sigismund had a complex relationship with his people. He was devout but distant, lavish but inflexible. Many resented his attempts to steer Poland back toward monarchy-centric Catholicism. He lost Sweden, nearly lost Poland too, but he never stopped trying to make the court feel like a cathedral wrapped in Versailles. He spent entire mornings arranging relics on velvet cushions, then entire evenings commissioning music to match the colors of the altar cloths. His personal violinist had to wear gloves dyed to match the king's sash. You're not sure why, no one is. And yet, there was something magnetic about him. His court produced masterworks of art, philosophy, and architecture that still define Krakow today. He wasn't warm. He wasn't wild, but he was consistent. You pause before a portrait in the hall. Sigismund stands straight, one hand resting on a Bible, the other on a gold orb. Behind him, a cloudy sky just beginning to clear. He ruled like a priest in a crown-measured aesthetic, and just slightly overdecorated. You exit through a garden lit by lanterns shaped like lilies. The grass smells of mint and incense. A statue of the Virgin Mary watches as you walk by. You swear her eyes move. 10 kings down. Each carried their sins differently. This one carried his in gold filigree, embroidered cassocks, and perfectly folded napkins. You step back into the Polish night, where the stars are arranged just so. Section 12. The cobblestones of Krakow give way to dustier roads, and the night grows warmer as you follow the curling path southward. You pass vineyards clinging to hillsides, olive trees twisted like dancers mid-spin, and the faint echo of mandolins drifting through air scented with thyme, and something suspiciously like mischief. You're heading into Naples, not the sleepy postcard version, but the hot-blooded, late medieval kingdom ruled by the House of Anjou and later the House of Aragon. And waiting at the end of this sun-drenched descent into decadence is none other than King Ladislaus of Naples. You arrive at dusk, just in time for the court's weekly midnight discretion banquet, a tradition Ladislaus invented, allegedly to encourage honest dialogue. Realistically, it was a weekly excuse for his nobles to wear impractically sheer clothing and whisper threats behind silver goblets. You're ushered in through tall marble doors. Inside, the air is thick with smoke from perfumed oil lamps, and the room buzzes with the hum of low conversation, polite, poisonous, and probably paid for. At the far end, lounging like a bored panther on a silk-draped dais, is Ladislaus himself. His beard is oiled, his rings sparkle, and his eyes flick toward you with the weight of someone who's already decided which part of your outfit is beneath him. He ruled Naples from 1386 to 1414, a period of stunning instability, which, naturally, he made worse. Ladislaus styled himself as a man of destiny, and maybe he believed it. He claimed to be the rightful king of Naples, king of Hungary, and king of Jerusalem, despite controlling precisely one of those places. 2 on a good week. And he was relentless. He launched campaign after campaign to expand his territory, sometimes pausing mid-siege to throw a masquerade. He also had a fondness for poison, both the metaphorical kind, gossip, rumor, bribes, and the actual kind, which may or may not have helped a few rivals into early retirement. Historians still argue whether Ladislaus was a brilliant tactician or simply a charismatic chaos engine with too much eyeliner. His court was infamous for blending military ambition with emotional intrigue. One moment, he'd be strategizing an assault on Rome the next. He'd be reciting erotic poetry to a duchess whose husband just mysteriously vanished. You walk past a side hall lined with busts. Each one bears the name of a noble family and a suspicious burn mark. A nearby attendant whispers, "He used to host debates on betrayal here." You raise an eyebrow. Like philosophical debates, the attendant shrugs. Let's go with that. Despite all this, Ladislaus was deeply popular, especially among soldiers and certain merchants. He paid well. He entertained extravagantly, and he cultivated a public image as a divinely irresistible monarch. Yes, that was a real phrase, printed on coins. In Latin, with Cupid, you explore the royal bathhouse, which is less about hygiene and more about velvet loungers, citrus wine, and whispered promises behind silk screens. One alcove features a harpist playing a slow dirge, while a servant fans petals into the air. In another, someone appears to be reenacting the fall of Troy, using only grapes and interpretive moaning. The king's personal chamber is quieter, lavish, but meticulously arranged. On the desk, maps, letters, and a half-written poem titled, "My Love is Like a Conquered Town." You resist the urge to peek at stanza 2. Ladislaus died young, just 36. Rumors swirled that he was poisoned naturally, possibly by a lover, possibly by his own sister, or possibly by a rival who simply got tired of the drama. He left behind a court addicted to performance, diplomacy steeped in lust, and a kingdom that promptly started unraveling the moment he stopped breathing. You step out onto a balcony overlooking the Bay of Naples. The water glows silver under the moon, waves crashing gently like applause. Behind you, laughter rises again from the banquet hall. Somewhere, a flute hits a note that sounds suspiciously like a giggle. 11 kings down, some burned with guilt, some with wine. This one, with desire dressed in armor. You pull your cloak tighter, descend the marble stairs, and walk on because the next monarch. Let's just say Naples wasn't the only place that knew how to weaponize affection. Section 13. The salt air fades. The marble stairs vanish behind you. And soon the road takes a dusty, deliberate turn east toward a land of opulence, shadowed domes, and a palace so vast it seems to breathe. You're entering the heart of medieval Constantinople, a city suspended between continents, religions, and realities. Here, emperors didn't just rule, they staged entire theologies with themselves as the lead actor. And tonight's act, a private audience with Andronikos Ikomnenos, a Byzantine emperor remembered not for his reforms or campaigns, but for a reign so spicy, scandalous, and unapologetically chaotic that even the marble seems to blush. The guards at the palace gate look tired, like they've seen things, like they've signed NDAs. You're led through a corridor of gold mosaics, saints, angels, winged wheels, and finally into a garden dotted with orange trees and harp music. There he is, reclining beneath a pergola strung with grapevines, surrounded by courtiers in diaphanous tunics and parrots that repeat court gossip on cue. Andronikos was, to put it politely, a problem-solving romantic, handsome, charming, and wildly intelligent. He was also reckless, manipulative, and, well, profoundly committed to dating his cousins. All of them. Sometimes, simultaneously, you sit near a fountain shaped like a lion vomiting water into a bowl. A eunuch offers you sherbet. You sip, trying not to stare as Andronikos strokes the chin of a young noblewoman while discussing the latest Venetian trade agreement. He didn't start out an emperor. He wandered for years into Persia, into the Crusader states, even into the arms of several foreign princesses. One account claims he seduced the wife of the king of Jerusalem, Another insists he faked illness to escape prison and promptly married the jailer's daughter. Historians still argue whether Andronikos was a brilliant survivor or just a Casanova with chronic wanderlust and a dagger up each sleeve. Eventually, he returned to Constantinople, claimed the throne through an impressive blend of charm, military threat, and good hair, and married his cousin's widow, who also happened to be the 12-year-old daughter of the deposed king of France. You pause, sip more sherbet. It doesn't help. Inside the palace, Andronikos transformed the court into an opulent circus of alliances, arrests, and nighttime philosophical salons that definitely involved fewer scrolls than advertised. You pass a wall of portraits, all emperors, and notice that Andronikos's is the only one winking. His reign began with reform. He cracked down on corruption, exiled or executed the worst offenders, and even forced court officials to actually do their jobs. At first, the people loved him. Bread prices dropped. Gold glittered. It looked like Byzantium might have found its golden boy. Then the paranoia set in. Andronikos became obsessed with betrayal. Nobles were tortured. Entire families vanished. One senator was accused of winking too suggestively at the empress. Executed. He imposed moral laws with theatrical flair. Adulterers were paraded through the city with bells tied to their legs. One man was beaten for wearing purple silk on a Wednesday. Andronikos believed in justice. He also believed justice was more effective if delivered while shouting and wearing crimson brocade. You stumble upon a side chamber where actors rehearse a court-sponsored morality play. The lead wears a crown made of peacock feathers and keeps forgetting his line, which seems to be, "Love is loyalty, and loyalty is law." A chamberlain sighs and offers notes. Despite the repression, Andronikos's charm never faded. His banquets featured philosophy debates between barefoot bishops. He once had a water clock shaped like a phoenix built for a visiting diplomat. He could recite Homer from memory. And he once danced with his daughter-in-law's parrot. The empire trembled. Eventually, the nobility turned. They invited foreign forces to intervene. The people, weary of executions and increasingly wild-fashion laws, revolted. Andronikos tried to flee. He disguised himself as a beggar. It didn't work. He was captured, dragged through the streets, tortured, and executed with such extravagance that chroniclers blushed writing about it. You stand at a balustrade overlooking the Bosphorus. The water glows faintly, lit by ships moving like ghosts. Somewhere below, the city sighs. The domes gleam under moonlight, whispering secrets from 1,000 years. 12 kings down. Some ruled through guilt, some through beauty. Andronikos, he ruled through seduction of hearts, of cities, and of fate itself. You walk on, past a statue missing both its nose and its innocence. Tomorrow waits. Section 14. The great domes of Constantinople fade behind you. The air growing cooler, drier, quieter. You move westward now toward the edge of Europe, where stone fortresses stare across foggy harbors, and the wind carries both salt and secrets. This is Portugal, small in size, large in ambition, and as the torches flicker on the distant battlements, you know who's waiting next. King João V, the Magnanimous, or, as he was sometimes known behind palace doors, his flamboyance. You arrive at Mafra, a palace so absurdly large it might have started as a monastery, and just kept growing because João got carried away. Rumor has it the king once saw the Vatican and said, "Let's do that, but with more chandeliers." You're welcomed by a servant in gold-threaded robes who offers you a menu for the bath. You choose rose petal and basil. He nods approvingly. João ruled in the early 1700s during Portugal's golden years of colonial wealth. Thanks to Brazil's gold and diamonds, Portugal's treasury overflowed so naturally. João built things. Big things. Long hallways, taller towers, libraries with magical-looking ladders, and a chapel that could comfortably seat several small armies. But what made João truly sparkle in histories, I wasn't just architecture, it was how he conducted his royal affairs, like a theatrical production of God's will. With just a touch of fan fiction, you enter the Hall of Embellishments. Yes, that's its real name, where ceiling frescoes depict angels offering scrolls to a man who looks suspiciously like João himself. He commissioned hundreds of works of art, including entire operas, where the hero's chin looked very familiar. Historians still argue whether João genuinely believed he was chosen by divine favor, or whether he was just a man with deep pockets and excellent lighting. João's court was drenched in Catholic pageantry, processions, incense, glittering reliquaries, and royal confessions held in Baroque confessionals shaped like thrones. His favorite penance, funding another church. By the end of his reign, Portugal had a lot of churches. And then there were his interests. You're led to a quieter wing of the palace where things get a bit plush, candlelit, and draped. João kept mistresses plural. Many were noble, a few were not. One, Mother Paula, was a nun. She lived in luxury within the convent of Odivelas, which João turned into something between a sanctuary and a 5-star hotel. Her quarters were filled with silks, pearls, and reportedly a solid gold baby cradle. Yes, they had a child together, whose christening involved a velvet canopy and a choir of 40. You pass a gallery filled with portraits of ladies in waiting, who appear to be waiting for nothing and no one. Their eyes follow you. One winks. Despite his indulgences, João wasn't neglectful. He was just maximalist. He sent embassies to the Pope bearing ships filled with gold. He launched a diplomatic gift so large it included wild animals, carriages, and several barrels of diamonds. The Vatican responded by granting João the rare honor of appointing his own cardinals, a privilege usually reserved for the Pope. João took this as a cosmic thumbs up and promptly decorated 3 more chapels. You step into the royal library, a vast space of scented wood and floating balconies. Bats live here now, kept intentionally to protect the books from insects. You glance up, one flutters silently past, like a tiny, judgmental librarian. The books are exquisite. Theology, astronomy, poetry. And hidden behind a false shelf, one volume simply titled Delicacies of the Divine Flesh, Meditations on Power and Pleasure. You put it back quickly. By the end of his reign, João had bankrupted much of Portugal. His obsession with grandeur, combined with military missteps and disasters abroad, strained the nation's once flush coffers, but the palace still stood, still sparkled, and still whispered. He died after a long illness. His successor found himself ruling a country where every village had a chapel, but no road to reach it. You wander out into the cloisters, where fountains murmur and orange blossoms drift like incense. A statue of Saint Anthony offers a lopsided smile. You nod back, out of courtesy. 13 kings down, this one ruled with incense in one hand and a gold-plated love letter in the other. As the palace recedes behind you, the road grows quiet again, just your footsteps, and the faint sound of distant organs playing a hymn that might have been written for him, or by him, hard to tell. The path curls west again, inland this time, through mossy hills and stony vineyards. The scent of earth hangs in the air, sweetened faintly by the promise of wine, and stories best not told in daylight. You've reached the last stop on this midnight procession of monarchs. A castle rises before you, stark against the stars, heavy gates, crooked chimneys, and windows like watchful eyes. You've arrived in Bohemia, and inside that shadowed fortress waits a ruler whose story ends this journey as only it could. With candlelight, contradiction, and one of Europe's most controversial kings, meet Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia, lover of books, ignorer of wars, and connoisseur of late-night distractions. You step through the grand entrance. The air inside smells of parchment and plum brandy. You pass tapestries depicting biblical scenes, except most of the characters seem to have rather more cleavage than usual. A chamberlain with tired eyes escorts you through halls lined with antlers, poetry, and abandoned goblets. His Majesty is upstairs, he says, unless he's downstairs. You eventually find Wenceslaus slouched in a reading chair, one boot off, surrounded by dogs, 2 monks playing chess, and a nude statue of Venus that's been scribbled on with charcoal mustaches. Wenceslaus ruled in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Technically, sort of. He was king of Bohemia, king of the Romans, the title, not the geography, and heir to an empire. But responsibility was never quite his thing. He loved books, loved nature, loved naps in the middle of council meetings, and he really loved wine. Historians still argue whether Wenceslaus was a misunderstood intellectual or simply a royal who preferred his wine list to his war council. Some say he was depressed. Others say he was just done with politics. Either way, his reign was more about retreat than rule. You walk through the royal scriptorium, where monks still copy texts illuminated with gold, and strangely often, cupids. Wenceslaus invested heavily in literature, commissioning translations of theological texts, bestiaries, and most charmingly, a 300-page manuscript on falconry, illustrated entirely with dramatic bird expressions. But while he adored culture, governance wasn't really his genre. There were riots, famine, noble rebellions. He ignored most of them. At one point, he was even kidnapped twice by his own nobles. They locked him in a castle. He escaped, sort of. Mostly, he negotiated his release by agreeing to leave governing to people who actually wanted to govern. You stroll through the wine cellar, which seems to double as an unofficial throne room. The floor is sticky, the torches are low, and the barrels are labeled with names like Council Meeting 1389 and Diplomatic Gift, Never Sent. A clerk leans in and whispers. He once suspended a court session because a squirrel ran across the hall. He insisted it was an omen. You nod solemnly. Who are you to argue with divine squirrel intervention? Wenceslaus's love life was equally unconventional. He was officially married twice, but rarely seen with his queens. Instead, his court was filled with friends, companions, and rumored lovers, both male and female. He gave titles liberally, hosted lavish feasts, and once funded a traveling troupe of fire jugglers who also offered political advice, apparently poorly. In the twilight of his rule, Bohemia simmered with religious tension. Reformers like Jan Hus were gaining influence. The Catholic Church splintered. Europe teetered toward Reformation and revolution. Wenceslaus responded by taking a walk. He died in 1419, quietly, without fanfare, in the countryside. No grand declarations, no glorious final battle, just a slow fade from a crown he never quite wanted to wear. You step outside into the chilly night. The castle behind you looms dark, the scent of smoke and spiced pears drifting through the air. Somewhere inside, someone laughs a little too loudly, and you suspect the wine hasn't stopped flowing. 14 kings behind you, each one strange, sacred, or scandalous in his own way. And Wenceslaus, he reminds you that not every ruler burns bright. Some flicker gently, indulgent, unreadable, and perhaps just a bit too early for the age that needed them. Now the road ends, and your feet slow. You're alone with the stars. It's time to sleep. You find a quiet patch of earth beneath an ancient tree, its branches swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. The moon is high now, pale and watchful, as if it's been listening to every word you've heard tonight. All around you, the kingdoms fade stone into shadow, gold into dust, voices into silence. Let your shoulders drop. Let the weight of all these crowns and confessions slip gently from your mind. You've traveled far, not through miles, but through centuries. Through flickering candlelit corridors, velvet-draped scandals, and long-forgotten prayers whispered between sips of wine. Each king you met tonight was real, flawed, human, some devout, others deceitful. Some ruled with fear, others with flowers. And yet, despite their rituals, lovers, punishments, and powdered wigs, they all vanished into history like candle smoke curling toward heaven, just like you're doing now, softly, slowly, sinking into stillness. So take a deep breath. Feel the quiet settle into your bones. Let the last echoes of laughter and liturgy dissolve, and as the wind hums low and the stars blink overhead, know that you're safe, you're warm, and there are no executions scheduled in your immediate future. Close your eyes, gentle traveler. Tomorrow can wait. For now, you rest.